Lesson 6. We go from the yamas to the niyamas. What is the difference? Yamas are refusals. Refusals of what? Human tendencies. Human tendencies that have room to manifest as long as we keep functioning subconsciously, which is natural, which is human. Because the ancient yogis came to the conclusion that violating those principles leads to conflict, disharmony, upheaval, chaos. They came to the conclusion that to end suffering, we have to start with the moral foundation of our functioning, of our being. Now, interestingly, every yoga practitioner, even without studying yamas and niyamas, naturally develops a consciousness towards these principles. That is why we call these principles universal principles, universal laws. They're universal because every person that develops a sensitivity and a consciousness, whether it is through yoga or through study of something or any cause that leads to such increased sensitivity and consciousness, automatically brings their functioning in line with those principles. The fact that you study them puts them under a magnifier, which allows you to much more efficiently implement those principles into your life. The purpose is not to become holier than the Pope, so to speak, because that would be a superficial goal. The purpose is very practical, to bring more harmony into our lives, which may not have a really practical meaning yet, but more harmony means more room for things that really matter. Living life more and more in line with yama, refusing to participate in violence, in lying, in theft, in unchaste behavior, and uncontrolled desire, is like a cleanup operation. It works like a cleanup operation. You cut out lots of distractions, conflicts that can be avoided if only we start paying a little bit attention. What is the practical benefit of that? It creates lots of room to focus on things that matter. I have seen throughout all those years that I teach yoga that many of my students spontaneously decide to pick up a new study or to continue a study that they once broke off, to get a degree, or to start a whole new direction. That is only possible if you have the room to do so, and you create that room by starting paying attention to these principles. Cutting out all the distraction, clutter, eventually conflict that is accompanied by it. And it leaves so much room for new adventures, new endeavors, new developments. The alternative is to simply stay put, which is the reality of most people's lives, if you look at it. Most people stay put in a job that they don't like or even hate, in a relationship that has long ago died, in a life that is killing the spirit, that is not motivating, stimulating, inspiring. So that is what happens when not only you practice yoga, but implement these moral principles. It seems that pursuing yama is like pursuing to become holier than thou, holier than the Pope. That's not the case. It has very profound, very deep effect on the rest of our lives from today forward. Life will not be the same anymore from the moment you start practicing yoga. And those of you who have practiced yoga already, you recognize this, you know this. So yama, the refusal to participate in violence, lying, theft, unjust behavior, desire, they are defensive in nature. You refuse to protect yourself, to protect your most valuable condition, harmony, to protect your most precious asset, which is energy. Niyama is an extension of yama, but niyama is offensive in nature. You have to actively pursue niyama. So niyama is more of a practice, while yama is more of an observation, and based on that observation, a refusal. Sounds very technical, but technically that is the difference between the two. Shaucha is the first yama, is the practice of purity. Now many yoga teachers will explain purity as physical hygiene. So they will go very deep into how to brush your teeth, how to wash yourself, etc. Physical hygiene is part of Shaucha, but it's only a very small part, and I mentioned it somewhere at the end of the handout, page 3. Of course, it goes much deeper than that. Purity, practice of purity, is about being consistent. I used in the handout the word consequent, which is a proper English word, but not much used. But in the Dutch language, the word consequent is used, you hear it every day. And it means people will tell you, you are not being consequent. When you are unprincipled, when you change your mind all the time, when you just go where the wind blows, when you're being opportunistic, having no spine. Being consequent, the editor of the handout, native English speaker, at the bottom made a footnote to explain what consequent means. For Dutch people it's very obvious, for native English speakers it needs a little bit refreshing because it's not often used in daily language, daily communication. In Dutch you hear it all the time. Being consequent. Is this important? Yes, because as human beings we have the tendency to make things easy. And that is the very reason why we commit violence and lying and stealing, etc. It's just a shortcut, we think, because we do not oversee the conflict and the misery that ensues from it, that results from it. Subconsciously, we have a tendency to take shortcuts, to take the comfortable way out. As a yogi, however, becoming more and more aware of the disruption that that approach causes, we start to notice that in the way that we deal with ourselves, with our environment, with life in general, situations, if we act in a pure way, in a consequent or consistent way, like with the yamas, that's not easy. On the contrary, it is the difficult way. But in the end, it is the most rewarding way. Being consequent, being consistent in the way that we act and react leads to stability, leads to trust. People know they can rely on you when certain situations occur because they know that you are consequent. They know they can anticipate, predict how you are going to handle the situation, react in the situation. So that gives firm stability, that gives a form of respect also. Leave alone self-respect. Being principled, being straight-backed is not easy. And sometimes people may accuse you of being a radical. In Korea you would say 극단적이다. You are 극단적이다. People have said that to me a lot. Especially in Korea, people say you have to be flexible. As a yogi also, you have to be flexible. But not compromise yourself. Not compromise your principles. Because the right word for that is corruption. You corrupt yourself if you stray away from your principles. It may be the easy way, but subconsciously it causes destruction of your self-respect. I want to wake up every morning and look at the mirror and smile, instead of waking up and avoiding looking in my own eyes. And that's what happens if I don't stick to my principles. I lose my self-respect. I don't want to see myself in the eyes in the morning when I wake up. That may sound superficial, it is not. It may not be the easy way, but yoga is not the easy way. Remember the fork in the road, 95% goes to the left, only 5% or even less goes to the right. The people with spine, the people with heart, the people with a purpose, people who feel inspired, they will take the right when they arrive at the fork. Consciously accepting the obstacles and challenges that they will face. Being a radical, 극단적이다, that is nasty if there is no flexibility in your functioning. So you have to function at the same time with the heart, with unconditional love. But when something is right, it's right. It's not crooked, it's not bent. Purity of motive is not only about being consequent, it's a very important element, being principled, and stick to your principle, which in some cases leads to people sacrificing their lives. You know the stories that every culture has about heroic people? Why were those people described in our history books and revered, called heroes? Because they practiced purity. And in many cases, people that we know as heroes, they did end up losing their lives for not bending their principles. They stood up for a cause that they felt deep in their heart was right. And when threatened, they did not opportunistically bend or become corrupted out of fear of losing their lives. Those are the martyrs, the heroes. We look up to those people. Don't look up to anybody. They were also human beings. They were more sensitive than average. They were more conscious than average. And that led them to be more principled than average. And that is what you will become too. Follow your feeling, and you will see that every time that you subconsciously, instinctively take a shortcut to make a situation easier to solve, start paying attention to what you feel. And when it doesn't feel right, you will realize the value of the practice of Shaucha or purity. You will arrive at a point that you cannot function impure anymore, because you become too sensitive and too conscious for that. So don't compare yourself with other people when you have this quality and say, yeah, their life is much easier because they just blow where the wind goes, or they just go where the wind blows. Why should I make my life so miserable by being principled? But it makes a huge difference in the way that you will evolve in this life. You set yourself up for conflict, failure, being stuck, if you continue to function in an impure way. While new doors open up in line with your practice of purity, which requires courage, persistence. You recognize this? You recognize the quality that the heroes have, that we know from our history, recent and long ago? That is this, what we're talking about. Purity in deeds is to act in a consequent way, in a consistent way, predictable. Consequent, purity in words is the way that you speak, You hear a lot of sarcasm in people's communication. You hear a lot of indirect speak. People trying to tell you something in an indirect way, often something unpleasant, nasty. Irony, which is saying the opposite of what you actually mean as a kind of a joke. And impurity in speech is also, which you see very often in the workplace, is making jokes about people, wrapping certain remarks as a joke, while actually being a punch in the gut. And then when the object of that nasty remark doesn't like it, you shrug your shoulder and you say, haha, it was just a joke. That is impure. So impurity in words, you can compare very much with lying, non-lying, satya. The purity in thoughts, you remember the story of the guy who was struggling with a big dilemma because he was aware of a colleague who was having affairs. He was single, but he was having affairs with married women, 3 in total he knew of. And he was very upset about that and was at the point of actually going to contact the families of these women. Remember the story? There you have to ask yourself honestly, we touched upon that. I asked him pointed questions to make him think about his motive, to make him think about whether his actions are based on purity or not. So there you have a perfect example of observing the thought process and trying to be pure. Why am I feeling what I feel, thinking what I think? Why is it that I am so upset about all this? The first reaction, which is only human, is to point fingers. In this case, it was the colleague and the women with whom he was having affairs. But in the end, it was his own struggle. In the end, if you oversee the possible outcome of just following up on that feeling, would have caused a lot of misery. So observe your thoughts and be honest about that. In fact, to practice purity, you apply all the 5 yamas. All the 5 yamas come together in the practice of purity. Non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, chastity is a very big one in the practice of purity. In relationships, there is a lot of manipulation going on that is not pure. Expectations, false expectations, and in the end, non-desire, which we discussed before the break. Yeah, the paragraph next to the donkey that is hanging up in the air, that's a very important one. Let go of anger, malice, regret, guilt, guilty conscience, and other negative emotions. Negative emotions are only human because of ego. We all possess ego, like it or not. There are people who say that ego must die, which implies that it is something that you can get rid of. That's not true. Ego is part of your essential functioning. But ego can lead to a lot of negative implications, a lot of negative behavior, especially when it is controlling us subconsciously. Big ego can lead to arrogance, right? That is how we usually refer to ego, in a negative way. But ego can manifest in a positive way. What do we call it when it manifests in a positive way? We call it dignity. So dignity and arrogance are part of ego. It just depends on how you allow ego to manifest. Now, emotions control us and affect us very deeply because of ego. But ego cannot die. That is a wrong way to express it. But ego must be understood in order to eventually recognize when ego causes you to feel in a certain way, that often leads to behavior in a certain way that causes misery, that causes conflict. Regret, anger, guilt. Who is not full of those sentiments? I am, for sure. But a human tendency is to drown ourselves in those sentiments. Drown ourselves in our guilt, in our regret, our sorrows. And that is overshooting the goal of those sentiments. Those sentiments have a value. But when ego is involved, it leads to self-destruction, mayhem, distraction. Everything that happened in the past, which leads to guilt, regret, sorrow, anger. I have a lot of anger in me, but I learned to canalize it through the practice of Hapkido and yoga. Not being in control of these sentiments leads to self-destruction. So how do you approach that? First of all, realize that you cannot turn back the clock. You cannot go back in time. You cannot change what happened already. What you can do is learn something from it. And as a result of what you learn from it, grow. All of us have things in the past that we regret, that we hurt family members, siblings, or friends, that we did things which at that time we didn't know. We were ignorant. Now we know, and then the guilt and the regret comes, and the sorrow. It's not fair to yourself to allow yourself to be destroyed by that. You have to be forgiving. First and foremost to yourself. Remember what I said in lesson 1 about ahimsa? First and foremost, we have to become our own best friend. And you have to apply that to things that happened in the past. You cannot turn back the clock, so it's a lost exercise to try to battle that. But what you can do is look forward with a positive mind, with a positive attitude, and try to not make the mistakes of the past. That's all you can do. Going back to the past is not possible. Turning back the clock is not possible. What, of course, is not a good thing to do is to continue making the same mistake and building regret and guilt upon regret and guilt. That is what unconscious people do. That is what we have been doing all the time until we started developing consciousness and sensitivity. But from that point on, that's how you deal with it. It's a waste of time and a waste of energy to lose ourselves in those sentiments. Sometimes, you know, in a mood of melancholy, just for a short moment allow it. And maybe cry and feel your misery, but quickly leave it behind. It is not constructive, it is not helpful. Does that mean that you have become cold and inconsiderate? No, on the contrary. It means that you are realistic and that you learn to control your energy, your most precious asset, energy that is normally scattered and lost to subconscious functioning that we are not aware of, that we are not in control of. It is the very reason that we get stuck. Stuck in a life where we don't want to be. Stuck in a relationship, in a job where we don't want to be. Cut out all the clutter, and that energy naturally wants to manifest in a positive way, going forward towards growth and evolution, development, naturally. You know why many yogis especially traditional yogis, make yoga sound like a religion, and they talk about God. You know why? Because when you practice yoga and you become more sensitive and conscious, you cut out all the distraction and conflict, energy remains, and energy naturally manifests if it is not being used by all those distractions. Marvelous things start to happen. Miracles almost start to happen. Developments in your life that you did not believe possible start to happen. And it seems like there is a higher power at work that is doing that for you. I see it like that too. But technically how it works is energy always wants to manifest. But if all the energy is being absorbed by emotions, by uncontrolled thought flow, constant chatter in your head, by all those conflicts that we create because we are living besides the moral principles of non-violence, non-stealing, non-lying, etc., there is no energy to manifest. And that is where we get stuck, uninspired. The spirit dies. Happiness fades away. So you stop wasting all that energy naturally manifests towards something more of your liking, more in line with what you really wish to pursue in life. My life has evolved like that, and many of my students' life has evolved like that. Purity, therefore, is synonymous also with discovering, with self-realization. In yoga we call it self-realization, discovering who we really are. Impure is to identify with idols, with images that we are not, based on what the media is presenting us, based on what the TV is presenting us. I mentioned somewhere in this handout that TV and novels generally are impure when it is fiction. If it is non-fiction, it's another story. That's the reality of life. But fiction is a fantasy, and a lot of work is created for the sake of making money, and so the people creating that work, they skip all these steps. They create an illusion that they think will be so attractive that everybody will buy their book or their film or what have you. So self-realization is a natural consequence of yoga practice. You all will connect with your heart's content. In another word, you'll develop soul consciousness. These are all concepts that sound a little bit vague or unrealistic, but it's very, very real. I don't know if I've told you this already, probably not, because we only had, this is our third day only together. When I was 16 years old, I found one of my uncles had died, and he had a big wooden chest that was filled with books. And he had several yoga books. And I picked out a book and I brought it home. And I read the first chapter. And that is my first contact with yoga. What? 16 years? I was too young to start practicing, but I never forgot the feeling that I got with the introduction of that book. Deep in my heart, I knew this was for me. It took 4 more years. But as a teenager, growing up in turmoil, especially as a teenager, I got disconnected. I was not myself anymore. And I became very dark. So I asked myself the question, if not so dark, if not so depressed, unhappy, what do you want? And the answer to that was very simple, refreshingly simple. I didn't want a career or be rich or what have you. What does a teenager want? The answer to that question, I asked myself, what do you want? What do you want? My answer was, I just want to be happy. Then the next question came. How do you do that? And the answer was also refreshingly simple. It was not get rich or climb the ladder of career or obtain this or that. How do you become happy again? Just by being yourself again. As young and unexperienced as I was, in a moment of reflection, I realized that as a child, I was happy innocent, naive, but I was myself, happy, playful, etc. That got lost because circumstances changed. And as a child, you have no control over circumstances. Other adults have to take care of that for you, and if they don't, you get lost. And ever since then, that is what I've been pursuing. Just trying to be myself. You feel sad, you feel sad. You undergo it, you observe it, you try to understand it. You're happy, you dance. You smile, you laugh, you joke. Just be yourself. Don't care about what others, your environment, thinks of it. Just be yourself. Because they don't make you happy, you have to do it. And that has led to everything where I am today, 40 years later. That is purity. Purity is asking yourself, what do I want? And then how to do it, and then simply, little by little, start pursuing that. And it has made all the difference. I come from a big family, a lot of misery there because of the circumstances. We were all subjected to those circumstances, not only me. 2 of my brothers died in their mid-40s, 2008 and 2011. I grew up with those 2. We did everything together. If I had not asked myself that question when I was 16 and start practicing yoga, I would have died too. Somewhere around that age, somewhere in my mid-40s. We were all on the same path as child and teenager. But because I asked myself that question, ended up practicing yoga, I took the right path at the fork in the road. And they stayed where they were stuck. Easy? No. It's the only way you have available once you start practicing yoga. It's the only option you have. And it's the most grateful choice to make. Because everything starts making sense. You finally end up doing what you love to do, not what you're supposed to do. It sounds very idealistic, it is not. I have tried to adapt to the life that other people think is the normal thing to do. So after I started yoga, and then a year later, I started practicing Hapkido. And then 4 years later or so, I got into a relationship and I tried to live a normal life with a full-time job. And I started losing all my hair. I lost my happiness again. I got stuck again. It's a pattern. Consciousness is something that doesn't come in a package, the whole bag full. It comes little by little. So, one day you wake up realizing that you're stuck again. And you ask yourself, okay, then what can I do to unstuck myself? And that's when I came to the conclusion, I have to fulfill my dream, which was going to Korea. Because I started practicing Hapkido, I just wanted to go to Korea, where Hapkido is from, where my master in Amsterdam was from. The foolish child's dream, you can call it, but that's what I really wanted. And because I thought that is impossible, that is too unrealistic, so I tried to live a normal life with a normal relationship and a normal job. That was not an option anymore for me. It killed me spiritually. It literally killed my spirit, my joy, my happiness. So I had to take that right road again, the road of obstacles and challenges. Easy? No. But no regrets. Everything I'm telling you about growth, development, evolution, change is not based on a text that we read. It's based on experience, going through that. And don't get me wrong, there is darkness involved, there is misery involved, desperation. But every time that happens, it's not something to indulge in, to drown in. It's simply another reason to make a reset. I call this a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Life will never be rosy without pain, without failure, without suffering. That's simply not, that doesn't exist. The reason why we grow, the reason why we progress is because of those setbacks that we have. Every time this 1 step back is necessary to be able to make 2 steps forward. And that is how we have to learn to see this, because as human beings, subconsciously we have a tendency, because of ego, to identify with the misery, and that is where we get stuck. But when you understand that the misery, the desperation sometimes that you go through is only, how do you call it, an interlude? Is that a proper English word, an interlude? A stage, a necessary, important stage to allow you to go to the next stage. 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, I was at a very low point, to the point of desperation. I decided not to teach, not as a luxury, but pure necessity. But that meant I had no income. And I really started to think that I had wasted all my life following my heart. I started looking at websites in Amsterdam, looking for a house that I could possibly rent. But I have Korean nationality, so the dilemma, how am I going to get back? They will see me as a foreigner if I go. I thought, as a yoga teacher, I'm not a yoga teacher, what am I? Then Pada came, and you would think that at the lowest point in your life, that is the last thing that you are going to engage in. Adopting a dog, a wild dog at that. That is what normal people do. That dog came from heaven. At my deepest point, that dog came so that I had something to focus on. Something positive, something that makes my heart glow. And the rest is just a matter of patience. Hang in there. Just focus on doing your daily things that you need to do. And then the phone rings. Neda, who is in this class also, she contacted me and she said, Ron, I'm with Mr. Han. And Mr. Han has a studio in Yoido. He says you can use it if you want for your weekend class. I think I told you this, right? So that's how things started moving again. It's a gift from heaven. And those gifts you will get when you hang in there and keep focusing on positive things, on constructive things. it's a little bit cynical what I'm going to tell you now, but you know, I live right in front of the park here. Yoido has 3 bridges, and I walk my dogs for 4 o'clock, between 4 and 5 o'clock. Usually I wake up around 4, and I walk through the park. And I very often see those red flashlights of the fire brigade on the bridge and the rescue brigade under the bridge. People jump off the bridge in desperation. I've been that desperate too, but I never give in to that. Because I know how it works. I remind myself my mom used to say, after rain comes sunshine. Behind the clouds, the sun shines. I know today is today, and it can be miserable, but next year will not be like today. So just keep doing what you need to do. For me, when I'm in such a situation, I have a military discipline to keep going. I'm at my best in such a situation. Doing yoga every day, making long walks every day. That dog came to me to rescue me. Can you see that? As yogi, you will start doing things also that seem in contradiction with what other people think is normal, but it makes total sense to you. Because you see and feel things that other people can't see in their one-dimensional or two-dimensional vision. You have a three-dimensional vision. You see the purpose behind everything, including, and maybe most importantly, in your misery and your suffering. And it propels you forward, and it leads to the most amazing manifestations, which I've experienced again. Something that I've been pursuing for more than 15 years. Something that is related to my future is manifesting like it's impossible to believe, and it's happening. I see it as a reward from heaven. Purity is follow your heart. On the surface it may seem very difficult, but it is so rewarding. Everything, the dots will connect, the pieces of the puzzle will fall into place, everything will start making sense. Sometimes you may get stuck. Then send me an email. Because sometimes you just need a kick in your butt. Sometimes something can seem so complicated that you cannot oversee it anymore. I will write you 2 sentences to get you back to the essence of what it is about. And it will be possible to move forward again. With hope in your heart. You will see. It's that simple, often. That doesn't make the problem go away. The problem is real. But it gives you a tool to deal with it in a positive and constructive way. When I'm in trouble, I talk to myself in the same way that I would talk with a student in trouble. I have to force myself to do that. I have an ego too. The ego sometimes needs a kick in the butt too. But not for a positive reason. Okay, purity. The final paragraph in deeds. The whole thing that we talked about generally is, of course, purity in deeds, but there is indeed also such thing as purity in terms of hygiene. So everybody takes a shower, brushes teeth. That's not an issue, I think. But purity is also the food that we eat and drink. And we live in very challenging times where it comes to food, because it's a commercial industry. And especially the companies that keep themselves busy with the industry of food in a factory. Food originally doesn't come from a factory, you know. But 80% of all food does come from a factory these days. And when they produce that, their objective is not to make you happy and healthy. Yeah, happy in a superficial way, by using all kinds of chemicals to make you become addicted to that kind of food. So purity in deeds where it comes to food is simply try. You don't have to be holier than the Pope. Let's say that again. Enjoy your processed food sometimes. But generally, on a daily basis, eat foods that are as pure as possible. As if they just came from the farm, from nature, not being tinkered with all kinds of processes and unnatural materials, chemicals and what have you. If you walk around the supermarket and you look with a special eye, you will see that 80% of all the products in the supermarket is processed. Almost all of it. But I think, and in my experience also, people who practice yoga very naturally feel more drawn to pure foods than before. I've been very fanatic in that sense, and I loosen up a little bit. Like I'm telling you also, sometimes you just have to enjoy something you like to eat without having to think of whether it's pure or not. But generally, just keep it as pure as possible. But life is not to be suffered, it has to be enjoyed. Questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You spoke about the step back, and you said that it's necessary for the next stage, right?
Yeah.
So I want to know that how this step back can be happening in our life. Is it because of our selection, or the life suddenly change?
No, it's because nothing is perfect. No matter how much you practice yoga and meditation, and no matter how sensitive and conscious you are, we make mistakes, or things go wrong or off the rails in life because of ignorance. That is, natural condition of human beings is ignorance, which literally means not knowing. But so out of ignorance, we make mistakes or things go wrong because we don't see them coming.
Right.
So when that happens, we undergo the suffering from that. But if we do that consciously, we can correct. We can learn from it and correct.
Yeah.
So we become experienced, we become wise, but never 100%, never perfect. So if you are on the path that we are on, I can call it yoga, but that sounds a little bit superficial. But if you're on this path of consciousness and that development, the evolution, you will indeed succeed in cutting out a lot of the misery based on increasing insight. That is why you have a memory, if you use it wisely. And you will become more and more skillful at anticipating misery. And anticipating misery allows you to not even let it happen. So in an ignorant condition, misery happens. And you only realize it when you're in the middle of it. You didn't see it coming, you didn't see it developing, but once you're in the middle of it, then you say, oh my God, what the hell is happening with me? But when you develop the power of anticipation, which is crown chakra, you start seeing the seed for misery. That seed hasn't even started to sprout yet. You stay away from it.
So actually, that gives us some special capacity, right?
They give us what?
Capacity to
Yes.
understand. So we can say that like it's part of a harmony in our life.
It helps you more and more to preserve harmony. Yes. Let me give you a practical example. Everybody has had relationships in their lives, right? Love relationships. Okay? Now look back at your previous relationships, especially when they started. If I look back, I see a lot of impurity there. I see red flags. And then just ignoring them out of impure motives, out of desire, ending up in a lot of misery. So what that teaches you later is to start paying attention to the red flags, which is your intuition, which is your power of anticipation is already there, but you didn't pay attention to it, or you allowed other elements to overrule it. But because it leads to misery, next time being confronted with a situation where you see red flags, you learn to avoid it. And just be patient. Patanjali says, we will come to that towards the end of the course, when we study the kleshas, which is the science of misery basically. Patanjali says in one of his sutras, the misery that has not come can and must be avoided. You know what that means? It is his way, in a nice way, to say, don't be stupid. I have given you all the tools to open your consciousness, to make you aware of how you function. Now it is your job not to allow misery to happen again. So misery happens once, then you correct, then it happens twice, it gives you more deeper insight. Should not happen a third time. So in Holland we say, we have an expression that says, a donkey in general does not bump its head twice. Something like that. It's always difficult to translate expressions because in Dutch most expressions they sound like a rhyme. You translate it and it loses that poetic sound of it. But that's the same as Patanjali saying, misery that has not come can and must be avoided. That means keep your eyes open. When you see alarm bells, when you see misery coming, run away as fast as you can. And it applies to many things in life. So all we have to do is start paying attention to what? To what we feel, what we really feel. Okay, let's have a short break.